Sarah Martinez had been looking forward to this night for weeks. After 8 grueling months of deployment in the Middle East, she finally had some time off. The small coastal town of Virginia Beach was perfect for blending in and enjoying a quiet evening away from the intensity of her military life. She chose a simple outfit: jeans, a casual top, and sneakers. Nothing that would draw attention to her athletic build or hint at her true profession. Sarah had learned long ago that being a woman in the Navy SEALs meant constantly proving herself, and sometimes the best strategy was to remain invisible. The Anchor's Rest was a typical military town pub. Wooden floors creaked under heavy boots. The walls were covered with maritime decorations, and the air smelled of beer and fried food. It was exactly what Sarah needed: a place where she could sit quietly, enjoy a drink, and watch a football game without anyone bothering her. She found a corner booth and ordered a beer. The bartender, a friendly older man with graying hair, didn't ask questions. Sarah appreciated that. She settled in to watch the game, her trained eyes automatically scanning the room out of habit. Most of the customers were locals, a few tourists, and scattered groups of military personnel from nearby bases. Everything was going perfectly until the door opened with a loud bang. 5 Marines walked in, their voices already raised from whatever celebration they had started elsewhere. They wore civilian clothes, but Sarah could spot military bearing from across a crowded room. Their haircuts, posture, and the way they moved together as a unit gave them away immediately. The Marines grabbed a large table near the center of the pub and ordered a round of beers. Their conversation was loud and animated, filled with stories about training exercises and friendly competition between different military branches. Sarah tried to ignore them and focus on the game, but their volume made it impossible. "Navy thinks they're so tough," one of them said, his voice carrying across the room. "But when it comes to real combat, Marines get the job done." Sarah took a sip of her beer and kept her eyes on the television screen. She had heard this kind of talk before. Inter-service rivalry was nothing new, and she usually found it amusing rather than offensive. These Marines were just blowing off steam after a long week of training. But then one of them noticed her sitting alone. "Hey, look at that," he said to his friends, nodding in Sarah's direction. "Pretty girl, all by herself. Think she needs some company?" Sarah felt their attention shift toward her. She continued watching the game, hoping they would lose interest and go back to their own conversation. Experience had taught her that engaging with drunk Marines rarely ended well, especially when she was trying to enjoy a peaceful evening. The Marine who had first spotted her stood up and walked over to her booth. He was tall and muscular, with the confident swagger of someone used to getting his way. His friends followed, surrounding her table in a semicircle. "Mind if we join you?" he asked, though he was already sliding into the booth across from her. "I'm Jake, and these are my buddies. We're Marines from Camp Lejeune." Sarah looked up from her beer and gave them a polite smile. "I'm just trying to watch the game. Thanks." Jake laughed and gestured to his friends. "Come on, don't be antisocial. We're celebrating. My buddy here just got promoted to sergeant. Buy you a drink?" The other Marines chuckled and began settling into the remaining seats around her booth. Sarah found herself effectively trapped in the corner, with 5 large men blocking any easy exit. The situation was escalating exactly as she had hoped it wouldn't. "Really, I'm fine," she said, her voice remaining calm and friendly. "Congratulations on the promotion, but I'd prefer to drink alone tonight." Jake's expression changed slightly. He was used to women being impressed by his military status and charm. Sarah's polite rejection seemed to confuse him more than anything else. "What's wrong with a little conversation?" he pressed. "We're the good guys, you know. We protect people like you." The condescending tone made Sarah's jaw tighten slightly, but she maintained her composure. She had dealt with worse situations than this, and her training had taught her patience and tactical thinking. The best outcome would be to diffuse the situation without revealing who she was or what she was capable of. "I appreciate your service," she said diplomatically. "I just want to finish my beer and head home." One of the other Marines, a stocky man with a thick Boston accent, leaned forward on the table. "You're not very friendly, are you?" We're just trying to be nice. Sarah glanced around the pub. The bartender was watching the situation with growing concern, but he was an older man who probably wouldn't be much help if things got physical. The other customers were either ignoring what was happening or seemed uncomfortable, but unwilling to intervene. She realized she was going to have to handle this herself, just like she handled everything else in her life. The question was how much of her true self she was willing to reveal to make these Marines back down. "Look," she said, her voice taking on a slightly firmer tone. "I'm military too, and I know how these things go. Let's just call it a night before someone says something they'll regret." Jake's eyes lit up with interest. "Military? What branch? Army? Air Force?" Sarah hesitated for just a moment, knowing that her next words would change everything about this encounter. "Navy," Sarah said simply, hoping that would be enough to satisfy their curiosity. The reaction was immediate and predictable. All 5 Marines burst into laughter, and Jake slapped the table with his hand. "Navy," he exclaimed. "Well, that explains a lot. What do you do? Work in an office? Push papers around on some ship somewhere?" His friends joined in with their own comments. "Bet she's never seen real combat," one said. "Navy just floats around in boats," added another. Sarah took a deep breath and reminded herself that these men had no idea who they were talking to. In their minds, they were just having fun with a female sailor who probably worked in administration or communications. They couldn't possibly imagine that the woman sitting across from them had completed some of the most difficult military training in the world. "Something like that," she said, taking another sip of her beer. Jake leaned back in his seat, his confidence growing. "See? This is what I'm talking about. Marines do the real fighting. We go in first, secure the area, do the hard work. Navy just supports us from way out in the ocean." The Marine with the Boston accent nodded enthusiastically. "That's right. When things get tough, they call the Marines. Navy's good for transportation, I guess." Sarah felt her patience wearing thin, but she maintained her calm exterior. She had spent years learning to control her emotions in far more dangerous situations than this. A few drunk Marines with oversized egos weren't going to break her composure. "Every branch has its role," she said diplomatically. "Yeah. But some roles are more important than others," Jake continued. "I mean, no offense, but what's the toughest thing you've ever had to do? Navigate around some waves?" His friends laughed again, and Sarah noticed that their voices were getting louder. Other customers in the pub were starting to stare, and she could see the bartender reaching for his phone, probably preparing to call for backup if the situation got out of hand. "You'd be surprised what Navy personnel can handle," Sarah said, her voice still level but with a slight edge creeping in. Jake apparently missed the warning tone entirely. "Come on. Be honest. You've never had to carry a 100-pound pack through a desert. You've never had to crawl through mud under enemy fire. You've probably never even held a real weapon." This comment made Sarah's eyes narrow slightly. She had crawled through more hostile territory than these Marines could imagine. She had carried equipment that would make their 100-pound packs feel light. And as for weapons, she was qualified with more firearms than most people knew existed. "You might be surprised," she said quietly. One of the other Marines, who had been quieter than his friends, seemed to pick up on something in Sarah's tone. He studied her face more carefully, noting the way she sat, perfectly balanced, alert, ready to move in any direction. Her hands rested casually on the table, but there was something about her posture that suggested coiled energy. "What exactly do you do in the Navy?" he asked, his voice more serious than his friends. Sarah looked at him and recognized the expression. He was actually paying attention. Unlike his buddies who were too busy showing off to notice the warning signs. "Special operations," she said simply. Jake laughed so hard he nearly spilled his beer. "Special operations. That's rich. What? Do you do special paperwork? Special coffee runs?" His friends joined in the laughter, but the observant Marine wasn't smiling. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "What kind of special operations?" he asked quietly. Sarah met his gaze steadily. The kind where you don't talk about it in bars. The laughing stopped abruptly. Jake's expression shifted from amusement to skepticism. You're telling us you're some kind of secret agent or something? Come on. I'm telling you that you should probably find another table, Sarah said, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. The shift in her demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. Her shoulders squared slightly. Her chin lifted, and something in her eyes changed. The Marines found themselves looking at a different person than the quiet woman who had been trying to watch a football game in peace. Jake, however, was too drunk and too committed to his performance to back down. "Secret Navy lady?" he said mockingly. "I bet you've got all kinds of exciting stories about typing reports and filing papers." Sarah stood up slowly. The movement was fluid and controlled, and suddenly the 5 Marines realized that she wasn't trapped in the booth anymore. She had positioned herself where she could see all of them clearly and move in any direction she chose. "Thanks for the conversation," she said. "But I think it's time for me to go." Jake stood up as well, blocking her path to the door. "Wait a minute. You can't just drop hints about secret missions and then leave." "We're curious now." The observant Marine grabbed his friend's arm. "Jake, maybe we should let her go." But Jake shook him off. "No way. I want to know what kind of special operations the Navy thinks they're running. This should be good." Sarah looked around the group of Marines surrounding her and made a decision. She had tried to avoid this confrontation, tried to leave quietly, tried to give them every opportunity to walk away, but they had pushed too far, and now they were about to learn something they weren't prepared for. "You really want to know?" she asked, her voice carrying a dangerous quiet that made the observant Marine take a step back. Jake crossed his arms and grinned at his friends. "Yeah, we want to know. Tell us about these special Navy missions. Do you get to carry a clipboard?" Sarah looked at each of the Marines in turn, her expression completely serious. "I swim 2 miles in rough ocean water, carrying 60 pounds of equipment. Then I run 6 miles on sand in full gear. After that, I do 2 hours of close-quarters combat training before breakfast." The Marines exchanged glances. Jake's grin faltered slightly, but he wasn't ready to give up yet. "Come on, that's basic training stuff. Every Marine does that kind of thing." "That's my warm-up," Sarah said quietly. "Before the real training starts." The observant Marine was studying her more intently now. Something about her tone, her posture, the way she described physical challenges that would break most people. It was starting to add up to a picture he didn't want to believe. "What unit are you with?" he asked directly. Sarah hesitated for just a moment. Once she said it, there would be no taking it back. These Marines would either think she was lying and get more aggressive, or they would believe her and realize they had just made a terrible mistake. "DevGru," she said simply. The observant Marine's face went white. DevGru was the Navy's most elite special operations unit, more commonly known as SEAL Team 6. It was the unit that had taken down Osama bin Laden, that handled the most dangerous missions in the world, that recruited only from the best of the best. "That's impossible," Jake said. But his voice lacked the confidence it had held moments before. "Women can't be SEALs." "Women couldn't be SEALs," Sarah corrected. "That changed a few years ago. I was in the second class to include female candidates." The pub had grown quiet around them. Other customers were watching the confrontation unfold, sensing that something significant was happening but not understanding exactly what. Jake looked around at his friends, seeking support, but found doubt creeping into their expressions. The woman standing in front of them didn't look like their stereotype of a Navy SEAL, but there was something about her presence that was making them reconsider their assumptions. "Prove it," Jake said, his voice sounding less certain than before. Sarah reached into her back pocket and pulled out her military ID. She held it up just long enough for them to see the Navy SEAL Trident insignia and her security clearance level, then put it away. The silence that followed was deafening. The 5 Marines stared at her, as the full implications of what had just happened began to sink in. They had cornered, mocked, and challenged one of the most elite warriors in the United States military. The observant Marine was the first to speak. "Ma'am, we didn't know." Sarah nodded slowly. I know you didn't. That was the point. I was trying to enjoy a quiet drink without having this conversation. Jake's face had turned red, though whether from embarrassment or alcohol was unclear. How were we supposed to know? You look like... Like what? Sarah asked, her voice sharp. Like a woman? That was your first mistake. Your second mistake was assuming that because I'm Navy, I must be weak. Your third mistake was not backing down when I tried to give you an out. The Marines stood there awkwardly, suddenly aware that their loud celebration had drawn the attention of the entire bar. The bartender was watching nervously, unsure whether to intervene or call security. Look, one of the other Marines said, we were just having some fun. No harm meant. Sarah's expression didn't soften. No harm meant? You surrounded me, blocked my exit, mocked my service, and challenged my abilities. In what world is that? Just having fun. Jake finally found his voice again, though it was much quieter than before. We thought you were just some regular Navy person. We didn't mean any disrespect to someone like you. Someone like me? Sarah repeated. You mean someone who has earned the right to wear this uniform through blood, sweat, and more determination than you can imagine? Someone who has served in combat zones while you were playing training games at Camp Lejeune? The words hit home. These Marines were young, probably fresh out of basic training or early in their careers. They had never seen real combat, never been tested in actual warfare. Sarah, on the other hand, carried herself with the quiet confidence that only came from surviving situations that would have broken lesser people. The observant Marine stepped forward slightly. Ma'am, what can we do to make this right? Sarah looked at him with a bit more respect. At least one of them was smart enough to recognize the situation they had created and mature enough to try to fix it. You can start by understanding that respect isn't something you give based on what someone looks like or what assumptions you make about their job, she said. Every person in uniform has earned the right to wear it, regardless of their branch or their role. Jake shifted uncomfortably. But Marines are the elite forces. We're the first ones in. The ones who do the hardest fighting. Sarah almost smiled at his persistence. Marines are excellent at what they do. But you're not the only elite forces, and you're certainly not the only ones who see combat. The fact that you think you are shows how much you still have to learn. She looked around the group again, seeing young men who had been humbled but might still learn something from this encounter. Here's some free advice, she continued. In the real world, the most dangerous people are often the ones who don't look dangerous. The most capable warriors are often the ones who don't need to announce it to everyone in the room. And the most elite soldiers are usually the ones who are too professional to get into bar fights with strangers. The Marines stood in silence, absorbing her words. The atmosphere in the pub had shifted completely from the rowdy celebration that had started the evening to something much more serious and educational. The observant Marine, who Sarah now noticed wore corporal stripes, stepped closer and extended his hand. Corporal Mike Chen, ma'am. I want to apologize for all of us. This got way out of hand. Sarah studied his face for a moment, then shook his hand. His grip was firm but respectful, and she could see genuine remorse in his eyes. Petty Officer First Class Sarah Martinez, she replied. And thank you. That means something. Jake was still struggling with the situation. His worldview had been turned upside down in the span of 5 minutes, and he was having trouble processing it. I still don't understand how. I mean, the training has to be impossible for women? Sarah finished. It is impossible. For most people. That's the point. Only about 20% of male candidates make it through SEAL training. The failure rate for women is even higher. I was one of 3 women who started my class. Only I made it to graduation. The silence stretched out as the Marines tried to imagine what that meant. They knew enough about military training to understand that SEAL preparation was legendary in its difficulty. But they had never considered what it would take for a woman to not only attempt it but succeed. Corporal Chen cleared his throat. Ma'am, can I ask? What made you want to try for the SEALs? Sarah considered the question. It wasn't one she answered often, but something about Chen's genuine curiosity made her willing to share. Same thing that made you want to be a Marine? Probably, she said. I wanted to serve at the highest level possible. I wanted to know that I could do the hardest thing, be part of the best team, make the biggest difference. She paused, remembering her own journey. When they opened SEAL training to women, I knew it was a chance that might never come again. I also knew that if I didn't try, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. Another of the Marines, who had been quiet throughout the confrontation, finally spoke up. What was the hardest part of the training? I mean, Sarah glanced at him, noting that his question was respectful rather than challenging. The physical part was brutal. But that's true for everyone. The hardest part for me was proving that I belonged there every single day. Some of the instructors didn't want women in the program. Some of my fellow candidates resented having to train alongside me. I had to be better than good enough. I had to be undeniably excellent, just to be treated as equal. Jake had been listening with growing discomfort. Look, I get that you're tough and all. But come on. Men are just physically stronger. That's biology. Sarah nodded calmly. You're right. On average, men are bigger and stronger. But SEAL training isn't about being the biggest or strongest. It's about mental toughness, problem-solving under extreme stress, teamwork, and refusing to quit when everything in your body is telling you to give up. She looked directly at Jake. You want to know what I can do that you probably can't? I can hold my breath underwater for over 4 minutes while solving complex problems. I can shoot accurately with multiple weapon systems while exhausted, cold, and under enemy fire. I can carry a wounded teammate twice my size to safety, because when lives are on the line, adrenaline and training matter more than bench press numbers. The bartender had moved closer, listening to the conversation with fascination. Other customers were also paying attention now, drawn by the unusual nature of what they were witnessing. Corporal Chen asked another question. Have you been deployed? Seen combat? Sarah's expression grew more serious. 3 deployments. Afghanistan and 2 operations I can't discuss. Combat is different than training. Training prepares you for the physical challenges and the tactical situations. But it can't prepare you for everything else. What do you mean? Chen pressed gently. Sarah was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Combat teaches you things about yourself that you can't learn any other way. It shows you what you're really made of, when there are no second chances and no do-overs. It also shows you the cost of what we do. The mood around the table had shifted completely. What had started as a confrontation between drunk Marines and a woman they thought they could intimidate had become an impromptu lesson about service, sacrifice, and the reality of military life at its highest levels. Jake, still struggling to reconcile his assumptions with reality, made one more attempt. But doesn't having women in combat units make things more complicated? Doesn't it put everyone at risk? Sarah's patience was clearly wearing thin, but she maintained her composure. That question tells me you've never actually been in combat. When someone is shooting at you, you don't care about the gender of the person shooting back. You care about their accuracy, their reliability, and their commitment to the mission. She leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on the tone of someone sharing hard-earned wisdom. In my first firefight, I was providing overwatch for a Marine patrol that had gotten pinned down by enemy fighters. I put down 3 targets and cleared a path for the Marines to reach safety. When we debriefed afterward, not one of those Marines mentioned my gender. They thanked me for saving their lives. The Marines around the table exchanged glances. The story had just become personal, in a way they hadn't expected. Sarah wasn't just some elite warrior from a different branch. She was someone who had risked her life to save Marines. You saved Marines? One of them asked quietly. I saved Americans, Sarah corrected. It's what we do. The weight of Sarah's words settled over the group like a heavy blanket. The Marines found themselves looking at her with completely different eyes than they had just minutes before. She wasn't just a woman in a bar anymore, or even just another service member. She was someone who had put her life on the line for people like them. Corporal Chen broke the silence first. Ma'am, that patrol you provided overwatch for. Do you remember when and where? Sarah studied his face, noting a change in his expression. Helmand Province, Afghanistan. March 2023. Why? Chen's face had gone pale. Because I think I was on that patrol. The other Marines turned to stare at their friend. Jake's mouth fell open slightly as he tried to process what Chen had just said. Second squad, third platoon. Charlie Company? Sarah asked quietly. Chen nodded slowly. That was us. We were doing a routine patrol when we walked into an ambush. 3 or 4 enemy fighters had us pinned down behind some rocks for what felt like hours. Then suddenly the shooting stopped. Our squad leader said we had sniper support from a Navy unit, but we never saw who it was. Sarah felt a strange twist of fate settling over the evening. Of all the bars in all the military towns, she had walked into one where she would meet someone whose life she had helped save. Small world, she said simply. You saved my life, Chen said, his voice barely above a whisper. All our lives. The other Marines were staring back and forth between Chen and Sarah, trying to understand the impossible coincidence they were witnessing. Jake finally found his voice. You're telling me that she... He pointed at Sarah, then at Chen. And you were? She's the reason I'm sitting here tonight, Chen said firmly. The reason I made it home to my wife and daughter. Sarah felt uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. She had never been good with gratitude or hero worship. You would have made it out anyway. Your squad was good, your leadership was solid. I just helped speed things up a little. Chen shook his head. No, ma'am. With respect, that's not true. We were running low on ammunition. We had 1 wounded, and more enemy fighters were moving into position. Without your intervention, we might not have made it. He turned to his friends, his voice growing stronger. You want to know what elite looks like? This woman appeared out of nowhere, took out 3 trained enemy combatants with precision shots from over 800 meters away, and then vanished back into the landscape like she was never there. We didn't even know she existed until our debrief. The bartender had stopped pretending to work and was openly listening now. Several other customers had moved closer, drawn by the extraordinary story unfolding at the corner table. Jake was struggling with emotions he couldn't quite identify. Shame, certainly, for how he had treated someone who deserved his respect. Awe at finding himself face to face with someone who operated at a level he was only beginning to understand. And confusion about how to reconcile his preconceptions with this new reality. I don't know what to say, he admitted finally. Sarah looked at him with something approaching sympathy. You don't need to say anything. But maybe next time you meet someone in uniform, you could try asking questions instead of making assumptions. One of the other Marines, who had been quiet through most of the evening, cleared his throat. Ma'am, I have a question, if that's okay. Sarah nodded encouragingly. What's it like? Being one of the first women to make it through SEAL training? Having to prove yourself in a world that wasn't built for you? Well, what's it like for you? What's it like? What's it like for you? What's it like for you? What's it like for you? Sarah considered the question thoughtfully. It was more perceptive than most of the questions she usually received. Lonely, sometimes, she said honestly. Exhausting, often. Rewarding in ways I can't fully explain. But mostly, it's just my job. I don't think about being a female SEAL very often. I think about being a SEAL who happens to be female. She paused, looking around the group. The hardest part isn't the physical challenges or even the combat deployments. It's dealing with situations like tonight, where I have to choose between revealing who I am or allowing people to treat me with disrespect based on their assumptions. Jake winced visibly at the implication. But, Sarah continued, tonight turned out better than most. You guys were willing to listen and learn. That doesn't always happen. Chen leaned forward earnestly. Ma'am, is there anything we can do? Any way to make up for how this started? Sarah smiled slightly, the first genuine smile she had shown all evening. You can take this experience and use it to become better Marines. You can remember that the person next to you in uniform, regardless of their branch or their background, has earned their place there. And you can pass that lesson on to other young Marines who might need to hear it. She stood up and prepared to leave. And Mike, she said, using Chen's first name for the first time. You can go home to your wife and daughter, and remember that service members from every branch look out for each other. That's what makes us strong." Chen stood up as well and extended his hand again. "Thank you, ma'am, for everything." As Sarah shook his hand, she noticed that all 5 Marines had stood up as well, a gesture of respect that would have seemed impossible when the evening began. Sarah gathered her jacket and prepared to leave the pub, but Jake stepped forward one more time. His earlier bravado had completely disappeared, replaced by something that looked like genuine respect mixed with deep embarrassment. "Ma'am, before you go," he said, his voice much quieter than it had been all evening, "I need to apologize. Not just for tonight, but for thinking the way I did. About women in the military, about the Navy, about everything." Sarah paused and looked at him carefully. She could see that his apology was sincere, and she appreciated that he was taking responsibility for his attitudes rather than just his actions. "Apology accepted," she said simply. "But remember, I'm not the only woman in uniform who deserves your respect. There are female Marines, Army soldiers, Air Force personnel, and Coast Guard members who serve with distinction every day. They shouldn't have to prove they're Navy SEALs to earn basic courtesy." Jake nodded solemnly. "Understood, ma'am." The bartender approached the group, carrying a bottle of beer. "This one's on the house," he said, offering it to Sarah. "It's been an honor having you in my establishment." Sarah accepted the beer with a smile. "Thank you. This is a nice place. I hope I can come back sometime without causing such a scene." The older man laughed. "Ma'am, you're welcome here anytime. And don't worry about the scene. I think these young men learned something important tonight." As Sarah walked toward the door, she heard Chen's voice behind her. "Ma'am?" She turned back to see him standing with his friends, all 5 Marines now showing the kind of respect they should have displayed from the beginning. "Next time we're in a situation like this," Chen said, "we'll do better. I promise." Sarah nodded. "I know you will, Corporal. Take care of yourself." She walked out into the cool evening air, leaving behind a group of Marines who would never look at women in uniform the same way again. The quiet night she had wanted at the beginning of the evening had turned into something much more complicated, but also more meaningful. As she walked to her car, Sarah reflected on the strange turn the evening had taken. She had been recognized by someone whose life she had helped save, had educated 5 young Marines about assumptions and respect, and had hopefully made the military a slightly better place for the women who would serve after her. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her teammate Marcus, who was probably wondering why she wasn't answering his earlier messages about weekend training plans. "How was your quiet night out?" the message read. Sarah smiled and typed back, "Anything but quiet. I'll tell you about it tomorrow." She drove home, thinking about the look on Jake's face when he realized who she was, and the genuine gratitude in Chen's voice when he connected her to the sniper who had saved his patrol. These moments reminded her why she had chosen this difficult path, why she had endured months of brutal training, and why she continued to serve despite the challenges. The next morning, Sarah woke up to an unexpected email in her official account. It was from Corporal Chen, who had apparently tracked down her contact information through official channels. "Ma'am," the message read, "I wanted to follow up on last night. I spoke with my commanding officer this morning about our encounter, and he asked me to pass along his respect and gratitude for your service. I also wanted you to know that I've scheduled a training session for our unit about inter-service cooperation and respect. Would you be willing to speak to our Marines about your experiences? I think they could benefit from hearing your perspective." Sarah considered the request. Speaking engagements weren't usually her favorite part of the job, but if it could help prevent other situations like the one she had encountered, it might be worth the effort. She typed back a response. "Corporal Chen, I'd be honored to speak with your Marines. Please coordinate with my command through official channels, and thank you for taking the initiative to turn last night into a learning opportunity." Later that day, Sarah received another surprise. Jake had apparently done some research and discovered that she had been awarded the Bronze Star for the action that had saved Chen's patrol. He sent a formal letter of apology to her commanding officer, taking full responsibility for his behavior and requesting that his apology be passed along to her. The letter read, in part, "I realize now that my actions and attitudes were not only disrespectful to Petty Officer Martinez personally, but to all the women who serve our country with distinction. I have learned that true strength and heroism come in many forms, and that my assumptions about military service were both wrong and harmful." Sarah's commanding officer called her into his office to discuss the letter. "This is unusual," he said, showing her the formal apology. "Most bar confrontations don't result in written apologies to superior officers." Sarah smiled. It was an end.